Rediscovering Gita for the Modern World by Shrikant Soman. Based on Essays on Gita by Sri Aurobindo. Start of Chapter 12. The Significance of Sacrifice. Continued from the previous episode 81. Beyond External Rules. The Gita's Path to Liberation. Current episode 82. The Transformation of Sacrifice. From Ceremony to Spirituality. The Gita's Path to Perfection through Desireless Action. Reconciling Spiritual and Material Ideals in the Bhagavad Gita. Key Takeaways. The Cosmic Cycle of Sacrifice. The passage describes a cycle where living beings and gods are mutually dependent. Humans perform sacrifices to nourish the gods, who in turn provide rain, food and other necessities, thus sustaining life. Life without this cycle is deemed evil and vain. The liberated person and inaction. The Vedantist ideal is a liberated person who no longer has a need for action. This individual, whose joy is found in the self, has nothing to gain from work or its results, and is therefore freed from the cycle of dependency. The reconciliation of ideals. The Gita reconciles the Vedist ideal of active participation in a cosmic cycle with the Vedantist ideal of inaction. It proposes that the path to liberation is not inaction, but rather desireless action, where work is performed without attachment to its outcomes. 3 kinds of work. The passage identifies 3 levels of work: selfish work for personal enjoyment, work with desire but consecrated by sacrifice, and the highest form of work which is performed without any desire or attachment. Only the third type leads to true spiritual perfection. Symbolic interpretation of key terms. The true meaning of the Gita's teachings lies in interpreting key terms like yajna, sacrifice, karma, work, and Brahman symbolically, not literally. These concepts are elevated from mere ceremonial acts to profound spiritual practices that transcend transactional relationships with gods and lead to liberation. The Bhagavad Gita presents its theory of sacrifice in 2 separate sections. The first, in chapter 3, seems to discuss only a traditional ceremonial sacrifice. The second, in chapter 4, transforms this idea into a larger spiritual symbol. This raises the concept to a higher psychological and spiritual level. The cycle of sacrifice. Originally, the Lord of creatures created beings with sacrifice. He said that through it, they would be able to create and fulfill their desires. You should nourish the gods with sacrifice, and they will nourish you in return. By nourishing each other, you will achieve the highest good. Fostered by sacrifice, the gods will give you desired enjoyments. Someone who enjoys these gifts without giving back is a thief. Those who eat what is left from sacrifice are freed from sin. Those who cook food only for themselves are evil and enjoy sin. Creatures come from food, and food comes from rain. Rain is born from sacrifice, and sacrifice is born from work. Know that work is born of Brahman, and Brahman is born of the immutable. Therefore, the all-pervading Brahman is established in the sacrifice. The person who doesn't follow this cycle lives a life of evil and sensual pleasure. Their life is in vain. The liberated person. Krishna then talks about the superiority of a spiritual person. He says that for a person whose joy is in the self, there is no work that needs to be done. They have nothing to gain by doing work or by not doing work. They are not dependent on anything to get what they want. Reconciliation of ideals. Here we see 2 different ideals presented. The first is the Vedist ideal of gaining enjoyment through sacrifice and mutual dependence between humans and gods. The second is the Vedantist ideal of a liberated person who has nothing to do with works or enjoyment. The next verses reconcile these 2 ideals. The secret is not in action but desireless action, a liberated person has nothing to gain from either action or inaction. Therefore, you should always perform work without attachment. This is work for the sake of the world. By doing work without attachment, a person attains the highest good. Even people like Janaka achieved perfection through such works. There are three kinds of work. First is work done for personal enjoyment without sacrifice, which is selfish and useless. Second is work done with desire but with sacrifice, which is somewhat consecrated. The third kind of work is done without desire or attachment. This last one brings a person to the highest estate. The meaning of key terms. The entire meaning of this teaching depends on how you interpret the words yajna, sacrifice, karma, work, and Brahman. If sacrifice is just the Vedic ceremony, and work is only the Vedic rules, then Brahman is just the Vedas. This would mean that ceremonial sacrifice is the only way to get wealth and children. It would also mean that sacrifice brings rain and ensures the prosperity of the human race. Life becomes a constant transaction between gods and humans. People give gifts to the gods, and in return they are protected and nourished. Therefore, all human work must be a sacrament through ceremonial sacrifice. Work not dedicated in this way is a sin. Even salvation is gained by ceremonial sacrifice. You must never abandon it. Even a seeker of liberation should continue to perform these sacrifices without attachment. It is by doing these ceremonial and ritualistic works without attachment that people like Janaka reached spiritual perfection.